Hello, we are here today to discuss what happened last weekend, those tragic events in the night between Saturday 13 and Sunday 14 April, when Iran launched an unprecedented attack against the Israeli state. For months now, since October 7, we have been thinking that Iran would have not get involved directly in the conflict that is now a regional conflict, we must admit it, and would have acted rather throughout the net of its so-called proxies, groups in Lebanon, in Iraq, and in Syria. Whereas something changed on Saturday night, and Iran launched a direct attack against the Israeli territory. So this really marks a new step in the conflict. And we're here to discuss today with two of the leading experts of the region and excellent scholars on the Middle East, namely Professor Vali Nasr, who is the Majd Khadouri Professor of Middle East Studies and International Affairs at Johns Hopkins. Welcome, Professor. And Dahlia Scheindlin, fellow at the International Center. Vali, I would start with you. How can we evaluate what happened on Saturday night? Someone has been speaking of an attack from the Iranian side that is mostly, if not entirely, symbolic. Is it true or not? Would you agree with that statement? Also because, it may have been mostly symbolic, but we must admit that the costs for carrying this attack have been enormous from the Iranian side and also from the Israeli side. It is estimated that Israel spent over $1 billion for defending itself from this rain of Iranian drones. So where is the line? How would you draw the line between a symbolic attack and an attack that it does have a meaning? And what is this meaning, and what is the impact that you see that this attack will have in the next few weeks and months on the conflict?
Well, thank you very much. I think what we have witnessed since the Israeli attack on Iran's consulate in Damascus is a new rules of the game between Israel and Iran, which actually takes the Middle East to a new territory. By attacking the consulate, even though Israel has not accepted responsibility directly, Israel basically indicated that it can and it will hit Iran anywhere, anytime that it wants, and it can basically assassinate anybody that it wishes, particularly because the Damascus attack was not response to anything specific, but generally to Iran's larger behavior in and around Israel. Iran's decision was not to allow Israel to establish this new rule of engagement, and therefore by retaliating, Iran essentially created what it calls now a new formula, which means that anytime Israel attacks it, Iran will attack back, attack directly, and attack from Iranian territory. In other words, Iran's signal was that any attack by Israel will immediately risk war in the region. And Iran's calculation is that this risk of war would put pressure on Israel and act as deterrence against Israel. And the very fact that Iran took 12 days and then not only created tremendous amount of psychological and economic pressure on Israel, but it created tremendous amount of psychological and economic pressure on Arab countries, on European countries, and on the United States. And Iran's calculation was that those other countries will now put pressure on Israel not to attack any time that it wishes and escalate. And yes, Iran did use a massive amount of missiles and drones. And I think partly it wanted to send a signal to Europe and the United States that any Iranian reaction to an Israeli attack could be massive, costly, and war-making. And the win for Iran was not how many missiles got through and what damage they did to Israel. And it was more than symbolic. It's not symbolic. It was essentially establishing a fact that there is, in this new rules of the game, that Israel basically asserted that it can attack Iran anywhere that it wishes, at any time that it wishes, that Iran also is establishing the fact that it will retaliate and retaliate it massively. And the risk of what the consequences of an Iranian retaliation would have to be calculated, not only by Israel, by Arab countries, but by Europe and the United States as well.
Thank you, Vali. I would now move to Dahlia to have a look at the Israeli perspective. Dahlia, I would ask you, what do you think that the Israeli government's next move will be? Do you think Israel will respond? Will it not? You know, there is debate that the cabinet is discussing the next steps right now, but there are only rumors about the fact that Israel will indeed attack back. What do you think is the logic driving Netanyahu's government's actions? What is the Israeli government strategic thinking right now? What do you expect that Israel will do?
Well, the Israeli government perspective is that there absolutely must be a response to Iran's attack and firing of over 300 different drones and missiles, and including cruise missiles over last Saturday through Sunday night, through Sunday morning. The Israeli government apparently believes that it must respond to this, even though, of course, it was Israel that began this particular escalation with its attack on Mohammad Reza Zahedi, the Quds Force officer in Damascus, on the 1st of April. And even if the international coalition that has backed Israel so strongly believes that because Israel struck on April 1st and Iran responded, that this round should not be over, the Israeli government has not taken that position. There is, I think, a general agreement within the Israeli government that there must be a response, but there are, of course, divisions over just what kind of response. The Security Cabinet has met numerous times to try to figure out exactly how to calibrate the response in a very delicate way. Israel does not actually want to drag the region into a full-out regional war, and there's, I think, really very little possibility that Israel can respond in a way that causes Iran to respond that does not escalate further. If there is an all-out escalation, it will drag other countries in. Of course, we saw the activity of other countries, including the international coalition, again on Saturday evening. But if there's a full-out war, that will become much more severe. I think this really runs the risk of becoming a very, very multi-front regional and war with international involvement. I don't want to put it in too alarmist terms. So the Israeli government has to try to think of what sort of response it can give that it hopes the Iranian regime would probably respond, but not with a severe escalation. Now, of course, Mohammad Raisi has said that Iran would respond to any sort of Israeli upcoming response. And by the time this is published, we may know what that response is or maybe not. And so Israel has, really a very, very tense calculations to make. There are all sorts of options being discussed. Mostly this is a matter of leaks. Nobody is obviously saying what they will be, but there is understood to be a range that can be calibrated to try to look at the lowest possible level versus the much more severe escalation. And I think the expectation, of course, of the international community is that Israel will take that lower level. We see the visits of the foreign ministers of the United Kingdom and Germany conveying their concern that Israel would undertake a response that escalates further. And the Israeli government will have to make its choice. There are also divisions about the timing. Remember, there is a holiday coming up for Israel. There is a sense among the public that if Israel were to escalate in a way that costs the international coalition support, they're not supportive. And of course, people are very concerned about safety and security, and having something like a holiday, a reasonably calm holiday. And Israelis were, frankly, quite devastated by what happened on Saturday night. This is a famously stoic population that's endured a great deal of war and conflict, of course, since October 7th, 6 months of war. Nothing like what's happening in Gaza, but Israelis have already moved into wartime mode, and nevertheless were deeply shaken by the attack on Saturday.
Thanks, Dahlia. So you have given us the perspective of the Israeli government, and now I would ask you, what is the perspective of the Israeli citizens on what has been ongoing in the region in the past few days? Iran launched this attack rhetorically as a response to what Israel would have done on April 1st, on the attack against the Iranian consulate in Damascus, although Israel has never confirmed of having carried that attack. What do the Israeli citizens think of this dynamic? Do they think that Iran's attack is really linked to what their government might has done, whatever, on April 1st? What is the perception, among the population on this?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I should have said Israel's alleged attack on April 1st. We always say alleged, even though it can be hard to remember because it is so widely presumed and not denied by the Israeli government exactly. So, there is a general assumption that Israel did this. But I think that what's interesting is that in Israel, the public has to be reminded of the strike on the Iranian diplomatic compound in Damascus, because I think, the Israeli perspective has an incredible capacity to look at every act of aggression against Israel as if it has come completely out of the blue, ex nihilo, and was not prompted by anything. So the default position is that Israel is being attacked unfairly. And then, after that, there is sort of, a reminder of what Israel has done to start this round. So that's one perspective. And of course, remember that Israelis for many, many years have been under the impression and certainly, observing Iran's role in the region and view Iran as the source of much of the aggression against Israel. They, of course, know that Iran is backing Hamas and other proxies in the region. That was, if anybody was in any doubt, there is no longer any doubt after October 7th that these proxies are willing to work together in a sort of, with Iran kind of activating the network, even though there is also an awareness, I would say, since October 7th that Iran was cautious and did not necessarily want to jump right into this conflict. Even Hezbollah said it was not, and as much as it attacked quickly after October 7th, it did not escalate to full out war and join Hamas in its effort exactly. So, Israelis are aware that Iran is an actor that they see as completely nefarious and, incurably committed to destroying Israel, but also in a strange way as a rational actor. So Israelis are, fear Iran. And I still think that they hope that full-out war can be avoided. What we're seeing in survey research, again, is that a majority of Israelis are not necessarily for Israel doing, full-scale escalation at this point, and certainly not even a higher portion are against it, close to 75%, according to a Hebrew University poll, if it endangers the international coalition. I think there's also a difficulty conceptualizing what it would mean to be in a full-out war with Iran. It's never happened before historically. And I think we shouldn't underestimate the power of what people are used to, and they are used to not being directly at war with Iran. Everybody realizes, of course, that Iran is one of the best armed states in the region, and it's a little bit inconceivable what the consequences would be. Israelis had barely been getting themselves adjusted to the idea that there might be a full-scale war with Hezbollah that would knock out its its energy and power sources. And over the few days before this, Israelis had been talking about how to develop alternate electricity sources. So that, of course, is the concern to damage the civilian infrastructure carries over into an Iran war, of course. And Israelis are really thinking, for the first time in many years, what if we don't have basic power, electricity, water sources? Knocking out electricity affects every aspect of life. So civilians are really concerned about this. And again, they were shaken by the attack. In the nighttime hours, many people simply, couldn't sleep or didn't sleep, and really wondering if they've been brought to the precipice. Has it shaken has it shaken faith in the government? Let's be clear that the government was in a very negative state for Israelis before this. From October 7th onward, support for the government had plunged, and only a minority of Israelis support this government, roughly between 1/4 and 1/3. About 2/3 of Israelis want to have early elections, either after the war or immediately. And at points up to 70%, but not much below that even now, would like Netanyahu to resign. Again, either after the war or even immediately. And so the government was already seen as a catastrophic failure, frankly, given what happened on October 7th. I don't know right now if its management of the situation will revive support for the government. Usually, if there's a full-scale war, there's a rally round the flag effect in most countries. But this case has been different. After October 7th, Israelis rallied around the country, not around the government. And I think that they will give the government some credit if it manages to respond and avoid a full-out escalation. They will probably continue blaming the government eventually if there is a full-scale war of an unprecedented scale.
Thanks, Dahlia. And now back to Vali to wrap up this conversation. Vali, perhaps the most difficult question, what do you expect will happen now? What scenarios can we draw? We already discussed, will Israel respond, will it not? But beyond, beyond the Iranian-Israeli rivalry itself, what do you expect in terms of broader implications that these events will have on the region?
I think it's very difficult for Israel not to respond because politically inside Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu has built his reputation over 16 years as the best politician in Israel to defend Israel against Iran. He cannot afford not to respond. And also, it's usually within Israel's strategic calculation that it always responds, and it cannot or does not want to create a situation in which Iran has the last word. But the key question is what sort of response Israel would give, how direct it would be on Iranian territory, and then what the Iranian response would be. So in the very short run, we're still in the risk of escalation and potential war between Iran and Israel, more open war between Iran and Israel that could basically draw the United States in. But in the longer term, I think Europeans and Americans now understand that they have to get engaged much more directly to manage this rivalry, that you cannot have an Israeli-Iranian open conflict with no rules that can potentially plunge the world into a larger crisis. So I think we're going to see much more American and European involvement on both sides to create some minimal rules of the game to make sure that this conflict doesn't at any moment in time put the world in jeopardy.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Vali Nasr and Dahlia Scheindlin. Thank you all for having followed this video. Keep following our activities for more updates on the escalation ongoing in the Middle East.